Welcome to A Documentary Life with award-winning PBS documentary filmmaker Charlie Spickler. Hi, welcome to the first episode of Welcome to A Documentary Life with award-winning PBS documentary filmmaker Charlie Spickler. That's me. We're powered by coffee, sarcasm, and existential dread, and improperly microwaved Hot Pockets. Yes, that is my life. This is our first, and hopefully what will be many, podcasts about documentary filmmaking. I've been doing this for about 25 years now, doing documentaries for about 15 of them. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. So the plan is to go basically through all the steps of documentary filmmaking. Let me tell you a bit about myself, and then we can talk about, what this podcast is going to be about. It will be on Spotify, so people on Spotify, hello, and on YouTube, maybe Apple also podcast. We'll see. Still figuring it out. This is my first time doing this. However, I am actually an award-winning, as crazy as it sounds, PBS documentary filmmaker. I started making documentary films back in 2012 when my family went to go adopt a new dog. My wife and I had gotten a dog when we got married. His name was Felix the Wonder Dog. We loved him. At 14 years old, he went on to the Elysian Fields, which we're still very sad about. And the kids were quite young. And after about a year, they convinced me to get another dog. And we went to the one place in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where I'm from, that is where everybody gets their rescue dogs from. It's Sean Casey Animal Rescue, a plug for Sean. And we got Frodo, our black lab. Now, he wasn't named Frodo at the time. He was named Frodo by me at the rescue. He was about this big. He could sit in my hand. And Frodo was amazing. And Sean Casey Animal Rescue was amazing also. And we got the dog, and I was impressed by the grassroots aspect of this particular no-kill shelter. They had volunteers coming in, walking dogs, cleaning cages. It was amazing. So the next day I went back, and I said to Sean, we should make a documentary about your shelter here. And Sean being Sean, he said, okay. So I spent the next almost 2 years chasing him around Brooklyn with a camera, just me. I had no idea what I was doing. And out of that came Rescue Brooklyn, which is on Amazon. It was certainly a great first effort as a documentary film. I had never made a documentary film before. I spent the previous almost 10 years doing narrative film and webisodes and music videos, all that kind of stuff. And so I made Rescue Brooklyn. And I enjoyed actually making documentary films. So then basically I made 5 more films, which we'll get into at some point. And what I've realized is that documentary filmmaking is not so much a profession or an avocation, but a calling. And let me tell you why. Each documentary film I've made has been made with mostly my own money, because getting funding for a documentary film of any kind is quite difficult. Nobody wants to pay for a documentary film, and most festivals are not that interested in documentary films. They have a documentary film category, but usually they don't really care that much. And occasionally there are documentary film festivals, and there are so many documentary films out there that getting into one is nearly impossible. And quite frankly, documentary film festivals is not where documentary films live. So when you choose to step into the documentary film world, you're really it's a calling. It's a calling because you become consumed with telling real stories. And that's kind of what we do. And what I love about making documentary films is that you start with an idea, and where does that idea come from? That will probably be episode 2, but we can start with the fact that when I get an idea, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes I'll follow it to where it dies before it becomes a movie. Sometimes I'll follow it to where it becomes a movie. And my second documentary film came out of a friend of mine who was friends with this folk singer, Jack Hardy, who had died. And I never heard of his music, but when I did, he was amazing. He was sort of this Celtic folk. And oh, by the way, I will be rambling. That's kind of what I do. If you've seen my YouTube channel, Infra in Brooklyn, you know I'm a rambler. But anyways, back to the Jack Hardy movie. And Jack was really talented and less famous than he should have been because he pissed people off a lot. He said what was on his mind. He did not kowtow to the industry, but he did start what was called the Songwriters Exchange. And out of the Songwriters Exchange came Suzanne Vega and Tracy Chapman and Sean Colvin, many famous, David Massagill, very famous folk artists. So his legacy was quite huge. So I made this movie about Jack Hardy, and I got all these famous folkies to be in it, to play his music. That took almost 2 years. That's the longest I've ever spent on a documentary. Normally, my documentary life is about 9 months, and from beginning to end. And we'll get into that also at some point. But I had so much great stuff and songs and all this stuff. It took 2 years to cut 2.5 hours of movie down to about 1 hour and 45 minutes. That's still looking for a home. And then I finished that, then looking for, and I couldn't come up with another idea. And that was when I figured, okay, my time making documentaries was done. But I was wrong. Just when you think you're done, something happens. You read something, you come up with an idea. And this was right after the election, and Joe Biden won. We're not going to talk about politics on this podcast, but it was the catalyst for my next film, which was called Trumpism and the American Jewish Community, and it was mostly about the rise of anti-Semitism under the Trump administration. Not politics, anti-Semitism. And that's actually on Amazon, and nobody's seen it because Amazon, my friends, is where independent films go to die. And we'll talk about distribution much, much later, maybe episode 10 or something, because it's less important than making a movie. So I made that, and it was pretty good. There was a lot of stuff that happened in it. It didn't happen. And when we get into sort of the more episode 2, where we're going to talk about access and getting a film up and running, we'll talk about it then. But it was a problem. But anyway, it was out. It got on Amazon. It was distributed to Amazon, and I was pretty happy with it. So again, finishing that, and not having another idea. And I do have a notebook. I have a notebook where I write ideas. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. So I'm sitting there. It was Christmas of 2024, and we were out at my in-laws' house in Pennsylvania, and I was reading the New York Times, as I do, the magazine section, and there was an article about the Peconic Bay scallops dying before they could be harvested. The Peconic Bay is basically the little split on eastern Long Island between the North Shore and the South Shore that goes out to Long Island Sound. And I grew up in eastern Long Island, in Port Jeff. I had friends whose dads were fishermen. I went to Peconic Dune Sleepaway Camp. My kids went to Peconic Dune Sleepaway Camp. And I thought it might be an interesting story. So when we got home, I reached out to the author of the article, a wonderful guy named Christopher Magg, who's a New York Times writer. And I spoke to him, and he told me that when he went out there, he went on this boat with this guy. Now, Chris is from Ohio, not a local, and this guy really did not want him on his boat. He said this guy was happy when he got off. He didn't want to really talk to him. But there's definitely a story out there. But Chris, writes for the New York Times. That means he's writing like 4 stories at the same time, and had like 1 day to spend out there. So I said, hey, maybe I'll go out there. I'm a local. Well, I was local, And he said, yeah, give it a shot. So he gave me the name of the guy who was basically like the mayor of the town, the father of the guy whose boat he was on. And he gave me the guy's name. He says, he's got his own like charter boat thing, and so that's the guy you want to talk to. So I got up very early in the morning, drove 2.5 hours from Brooklyn to the eastern point of Long Island, and even though I grew up out there, I never went to Shelter Island, which is where the scalpers are. Shelter Island lives between the North Shore and the South Shore. And I figured, well, how big could it be? Well, when it only took like 8 minutes to go on the ferry from the North Shore to the island, it's pretty damn big. So I got off the ferry, and I couldn't find this guy. I couldn't even find like the docks where the boats were. So I was driving around for about an hour, and it was almost like 9 o'clock, and I was getting hungry, so I put in my phone, like, food restaurant, and it took me to this really cool, like, little quaint diner. So I went in, I left the camera in the car, I just had my phone, and I sat down, I ordered breakfast, and I said to this kid, I said, do you know this guy? He said, no. Because I told him I'm trying to make this documentary about the scallops, maybe about climate change. He said, well, the two guys sitting at the counter, two old guys, I think they're scallopers. Why don't you talk to them? So I said, okay. So I get up. I'll talk to anybody. I've got no fear. So I walked over and I said to these guys, my name's Charlie Spickler, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I was looking for this guy because I'm interested in, the scallops and all that stuff. He said, well, you know what? He's in Florida. And I was like, great. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. But the one guy said, this guy over here, he's actually a scalloper. Maybe he'll talk to you. So he did. We went over and we walked over to this booth, and I had my iPhone. And for those of you on Spotify, I could show you that I'm holding it with my hands, with my elbows on the table, filming. And this is Wayne, who's one of my main characters in Rising Tides. And he spoke to me for about an hour about the situation with the scallops, with climate change, with what's going on Shelter Island, what his thoughts were about why the scallops were dying. It was amazing. And I have this little Shure microphone that I stick into the iPhone for better sound. I didn't want to take a chance that he would change his mind and run out and get the big camera. So we got the stuff, and he was amazing. I told him about the movie, and we parted ways. I finished my breakfast. He told me where the dock was, which was really easy to find. It was just down this small path, like that was a path, but it was actually a road. Didn't look like a road. So I got down, I went to the dock. I took the big camera out. I shot a lot of B-roll. There was a boat there. I shot a lot of B-roll of the boat. About 15 minutes later, he calls me and says, "Hey, you want to go out on the boat and do this scalping? I'll show you what we do." I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So he comes down. We go on a boat. By the way, the boat that I was shooting the B-roll of was his boat. So we go out, and for about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, and we're out there dredging. And all the dredging we did, he got 3 scallops, which kind of makes the point of what's going on out there. All of that footage and Wayne's interview are all in the film. And then he said to me, I got other people to talk to if you want. So I went back out 2 weeks later, and I was in Wayne's house, in his kitchen. I set up 2 cameras and my iPhone, and we had Wayne and his friend Steven, and this other guy John, John was an oysterman, Steven was an old-time scalloper, and Wayne was an old-time scalloper. And I had about 150 years worth of fishing experience sitting at this table. And it was amazing, and it's all in Rising Tides. It's all in there. So that's how that movie sort of evolved. But then it also evolved into climate denial and climate misinformation. And I got 3 of the main people who were involved in fighting that. But what I did do, once I knew that I had Wayne, I reached out to 2 organizations. I reached out to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Citizens Climate Lobby. Both of them were huge in making this film happen because they hooked me up with so many people, events. It was great. And that facilitated almost everybody else that I got in the film. And then to top that off, I was just home working, and my mother, who knows all things, called me and said, "Do you know that Al Gore is at the Javits Center?" And I said, no, I did not know that Al Gore was at the Javits Center. He has the Climate Reality Project, which was, his documentary film, Inconvenient Truth, and then Inconvenient Truth 2, that's his slideshow. So I called them up. I said, I'm making this climate change documentary film. Can I come? Oh yeah, please. They got me a media pass, and I shot both days. I was able to shoot everything except the slideshow, which is copyrighted. But I really had like 7 questions I wanted to ask him, but you needed like 6 months in advance to set it up. But they allowed me to shoot his Q&A, and he answered almost all of my questions in the Q&A. So that's in the film also. So that's how Rising Tides evolved, from like nothing, from an article to a full-blown movie. So that I actually didn't go with a traditional distribution. I put that up on YouTube, and I had almost 5,000 views before I had to take it down for this festival thing, which never happened. Then I put it back up and lost all those views. But we did really well. For me, that was a lot of people watching my movie. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what it's about. It's not about awards. It's not about this, that. It's about people watching your film. Because it's documentary. That's the whole point, getting eyes in front of your film. So 5,000 views for me on Rising Tides was pretty cool. Then we fall into the what am I going to do next category. And I'd been wanting to do a film about the American healthcare system. So I started sort of development on a film called Denied. And basically I had so many friends with medical problems, and the insurance companies were not okaying the medication that they needed, like life-saving medication. They were telling them they didn't need. So I was getting angry. Usually when I get angry, there's a documentary coming. So I started working on Denied, and that kind of fell apart because I couldn't get a lot of people to talk to me. It's a hard thing. So then I got an idea about making a documentary about hostile architecture, which probably didn't have any legs, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And if you don't know what hostile architecture is, it's those like spiky things that they put on like the walls in the parks, on benches, taking benches out of the subway and replacing them with these slanty things that you can't sit on, breaking up the bus stop seats with those arms so you can't lay out, mostly so the homeless people can't sleep anywhere. And I thought that would be an interesting idea, but I couldn't get anybody to talk to me about that either. And just as that was fizzling out, I came up with an idea that really, it wasn't about hostile architecture. It was about the homeless situation in New York City. And so I started working on that, and then that sort of morphed into what eventually became Outcast Nation, which is on PBS right now. I met my partner Kate doing this because she was a social worker who specifically worked with homeless youth. And because of Kate, we got The Door, we got Covenant House, we got all these other important homeless youth organizations. And Outcast Nation, a movie that should never have happened, is on PBS. And we could talk about that path probably later on when we get to distribution. But for me, that was a major deal. Once you have a film on PBS, everything changes. Those 3 little letters next to your movie, all kinds of doors open. So while we were like basically delivering Outcast Nation for a December release, usually there's a 2-month lag. So we put out mostly me. You know what? When I say we, unless I specify, it's me. And so I was getting ready for an October 10th delivery for a December release. Usually it's like a 2-month thing. Me and Kate, we sort of revitalized Denied. That was kind of the next thing. And actually things started to happen because we had a movie that was going to be on PBS. People started taking us seriously. And I reached out to these law firms that were actually working on these class action suits against 3 of the major healthcare companies for what they called AI denials. These are denying people medication with AI. That's basically a 1.2 second denial. There was millions of them. So that was really cool. So as we were getting into that, we got everything together. And what happened was we were raising money. trying to raise money, and it was a very large budget. So, we were doing what we could do. And at the same time, I was watching the sort of climate, the social climate change in New York City as the rise of anti-Semitism became very, very obvious and very, very disturbing with the election of our mayor. We're not going to talk about politics, but it was relevant because I started seeing things I didn't like in New York, in Canada, across the world. And I started thinking that maybe I need to make another documentary about anti-Semitism. And I spoke to some people. I spoke to my mom, as I do. And in December, I realized that that I needed to make another film about anti-Semitism because this is what's going on. So I was concerned that, when I made the Trumpism movie, nobody would talk to me, but I didn't care. And that's why we talk about, documentary filmmaking being a calling. You get the idea and you need to make the film. And if you don't have that passion, then you're never going to make it in documentary films because there's really no rewards making documentary films. So I started, and that became After Never Again. And to my surprise, not only did people start talking to me, major people started talking to me. Major organizations started talking to me. So this has gone from something that was just an idea in December to a full-blown, huge documentary film that is going to be on PBS in December. And I've got major people in this film. It's much bigger than I ever thought it was going to be. And I think it's so big that we will be doing screenings of it before the PBS release. That's how many sort of famous people are in this film, talking about anti-Semitism, talking about the Jewish community as tribe. This really morphed from just an anti-Semitism film to a film that is much more about Jewish identity and what's going on in the world. I've traveled to Canada. I've traveled all over the country. I'm going to LA. This is big, but this is how these things happen. You don't have an idea. You've got an idea. Then another idea comes along, and next thing you know, you are like hip deep in the film, and because you're going to make it. And I always say that you don't wait for the good gear. You don't wait for the story to come to you. You don't wait for permission to make a movie. You get the idea, you turn the camera on, you start shooting and worry about everything else later. Now, yes, I now have a pipeline with PBS. Now I do have access to PBS for my movies, so it's less of a crapshoot anymore. But look, I made 5 films without any idea of distribution, just to make the movies. And that's why making documentary films is a calling. It's not an avocation. It's certainly not a job. You're not going to get rich making documentary films. A while back, I had somebody ask me, and honestly, because people don't know I think he was just getting out of school. Maybe he was a film major. He said, "What can I expect to as a salary making my own documentary films? To have a comfortable living?" And I didn't even know where to start to tell him how confused and misguided and mistaken he was. Because we try to be nice, we try to be encouraging, and I want to say, are you out of your mind? Go be a dentist, go sell shoes, go do anything other than this. But I explained to him that this is a calling. You get into this because you have the need to tell stories. A couple of weeks ago, I was up at my alma mater, Ithaca College, who actually threw me out, but asked me to come back now that I'm a PBS documentary filmmaker. Ithaca's got a great film department, and they got a really great documentary school. So I went up, I spoke to some students. It was amazing. I've got a couple of little mentees now that I'm working with. I picked up an intern, not literally lifted it up. She's joined us on After Never Again. And speaking to these kids who have a passion for storytelling, for journalism, of all kinds, of written and film, there's a fire there. And if you don't have that fire, if you don't have that, I'm going to tell this story, even if I have to shoot it on my iPhone, I'm telling this story, then maybe documentary filmmaking is not for you. I discourage anybody, but you're not getting rich. I mean, look, I can't even pay my bills based on what I'm doing, and I got broadcast, video, it's films, but I do it because I have to, and we survive. I have some side gigs to pay for some things. My wife has a real job, so we are, we're barely getting by on this, but this is what I can do. I'm not really qualified to do anything else. I'm not a good employee. I do what I do. So anyway, so that's kind of what this podcast is going to be about. We're going to talk about access and telling stories. We're going to talk about development and pre-production and production. And we're talking about gear and post-production and sort of distribution pipeline. We're going to talk about ethics in filmmaking. And maybe a little documentary film history as well. We'll throw in there. So anyway, that's our first episode. I hope to give you a little bit about me. I'm going to try to get these out once a week. I'm actually in production right now on After Never Again, so we'll see how that, it may get spread out a little bit. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. The film is After Never Again. You can see it on the screen here. For those of you on Spotify, there's a movie poster. And like I always say, keep shooting. Welcome to A Documentary Life was produced by Charlie Spickler, written and directed by Charlie Spickler, all rights reserved, Real Brooklyn Films 2026. For more information about the podcast, go to www.realbrooklynfilms.net.